Kylie Elizabeth, who has a master's in education, is known as the virtuoso educator, is a statewide secondary, career, and technical education administrator in Arizona, and owner of the Virtuoso Education Consulting Services. With over a decade in K-12 education, she has excelled as a vocal music educator, culinary arts teacher, and administrator, drawing from her diverse background in hospitality and as a self-taught baker and mother of two. She earned her BA in vocal music from the University of Wisconsin Parkside and her master's in ed from Alverno College. She's passionate about cultural responsiveness. She empowers educators through workshops and community events that make learning joyful, engaging, and relevant for all. I'm elated to have Kylie Elizabeth because she and I met online and she interviewed me. And as a courtesy, she was like, Jewel, I'll be on yours. I said, thank you so much. She and I love talking about education, learning about life, talking about just happenstances that happens to educators. And she and I talked about wellness so much. I thought she would be an excellent featured guest. And so, Kylie, just a brief, because they've already heard your introduction, but just a brief about who you are, what you're doing, and what brought you to this space to be on Cold Press Conversations.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Jewel. So I'm Kylie Elizabeth. I also go by the Virtuoso Educator. I'm an educator of over 10 years, kind of in various K-12 areas in education, everywhere from teaching in the career and technical education space, predominantly the family and consumer sciences side and culinary, to administration and statewide leadership. And so, yeah, I'm kind of like dibbling and dabbling in a little bit of everything. I also, I do work for the state, but I am also a personal education consultant. I have a consulting business called Virtuoso Education Consult Services, and I just support a bunch of different groups, nonprofits, people needing support administrative wise on the back end, charters, private charters, such things like that. But yeah, I'm kind of all over the place, and it's been fun. And so yeah, but predominantly again in the education world, and I love talking anything education.
And I know you do. I mean, we talked about getting a doctorate or going back to school just in general is a lot on us as educators. But one thing we all have to do is go back to school, even during the summer. They say, oh, you have your summers off. That is a false statement. That's a super false statement. We're always in school. That's the only way we can be better for our students and stuff. But I mean, I know that you and I did talk about like the environmental part of school, and there's a lot that goes into the environment and how teachers are impacted. And with you going into charter schools and into nonprofits, I'm sure you're seeing how the environment, the impact on the wellness of our teachers is impacting them as well as their culture. Talk to me about that.
Yes. I mean, man, we could talk about 30,000 things in this area. And I just think overall, we're in a tough climate when we're talking climate and culture of education and what that looks like either in the public space or in private space. But I think the movement right now is really people just want spaces where they're, the teachers to be educators within that space where they feel welcomed. It's not, toxic leaders that either confuse them or, don't really follow the rules that they set forth in their organization or their school. And kind of, shifting over to the parents, the parents, want their students in a space where they're receiving services that they need, being accepted for the person that they are, regardless of what that looks like. And, just really having that support for that whole holistic support of families. And again, the environment, I can't, the numbers specifically, I always kind of refer back to this. Our children spend over 18,000 hours in K-12 education. And so you have to have these climates in cultures of where they feel belonging, they fit in, they can get the education, right, that they need, and the supports that they need if they have special education needs, all of those things. For me, again, with what I talk about is really the politics of everything. It's so hard with education really being very business forward. It's a business,
Mhm.
and so it's kind of like you're interviewing for a job. Do you think you're going to fit in that climate and culture of that position, and you're yourself as the teacher in that role, and working for that district, school, that organization, that private charter? And then as a parent, does your child going to do well in that environment? So we have to be very strategic and very specific on what we want as the outcome for us as an educator and being fulfilled within our job. But then as a parent, if you're sending your children to these various places, you know, are you going to be fulfilled, and your students going to be fulfilled
Mhm.
in their education and all of these various things that they need? So it's a lot.
No, it's a lot. And the reason I was so elated that you wanted to discuss environmental wellness in schools, we as teachers spend almost more time with the student than the parent
Yes.
does
Yes.
within those 5 days.
Yep.
And so our wellness has to be top notch
Yeah.
because it will impact what's in our classroom or our environment, the
Mhm.
culture. And so you just brought up so much where we have to be um, conscious about what we say,
Yes.
how we say it, and to also be respectful to each person's home.
Mm-hmm.
And that's huge, and that's where the wellness comes in. That's where we look at the wellness of the educator, the wellness of the student. We
Yes.
see them coming in. Some of them are hungry. Some of them haven't slept at all. Some of them are sleeping in a car. Some of them are sleeping in a homeless shelter. I mean, we're
Mhm.
getting so many students there and so many different levels of care. And that's the only best way of wording it, the different levels from those who have within and those who do not,
Right.
based off of various circumstances.
Mhm.
We have to be the stronghold for those children.
Right. Yes. I think just like in any work environment, especially in educational environments, we all as adults and then the students, you can't just shut it off and, okay, we're going to learn today. Like, there's so many things to address, because especially if you're working with younger children, they can't shut it off easily and say, okay, yes, I'm ready to receive this information, this math skill, this reading skill. Like, it really is those basic foundational needs. If you're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like, you really do have to address those foundational supports that every person needs. And I think sometimes in the world of education that kind of gets put to the side of, but again, with limited capacity and supports that are provided within some schools, it's hard to meet the needs of everyone. And
Mhm.
I think, kind of without going too far into it, a lot of places and districts and states really do focus on the academic outcomes of students. That's the role of education, right? They're learning, they're performing to some entity, like whatever that looks like for those different areas. And but again, is what is missing and why are students struggling? And it's not always the content in which they're learning or the strategies in which they're being taught. It's a lot of it is they just don't have that mental space to take in that
Oh, thank you.
information. Yeah, because they have so many other things to worry about. And the same as teachers, so it is a very, I'll say, precious environment. I think that's the
Mhm.
first time I've ever said that, but I've been reflecting a lot on some things, and it's a very unique environment to be in, both as a student and an educator, because there's just so many different roles, especially as an educator, that you play in the system, and you have to address those self needs first before we can really build on the academic concept for learning.
Let me ask you this question because I'm asking you because I really trust your acumen.
Mhm.
Do you think that there needs to be within our mentorship, within our training, because the school, when I'm talking about when they're attaining their degree, they're
Mhm.
not going to have that kind of, like, as administrators, we don't take a course on discipline.
Mhm.
We don't. They assume that educators are the principal is all about discipline. We don't take a course in it. That's not what we're here for. We're here for truly teaching,
Mhm.
and to making sure your child gains his or her education. So, do you feel like there needs to be within the mentorship program or something like that, where we help the teacher understand and provide specific professional development for our teachers on the social, emotional, environmental key points that they need to be aware of while teaching? And I ask this because when I was a principal, I told the teachers, I don't do it often,
Mhm.
but read the room.
Right.
And if you
Yes.
feel like your lesson that you've prepared is not going to be a lesson that's going to be taught appropriately because something happened in the community or something happened in the world, or they just something happened at a church and they were like, oh yeah, such and such had it's something. It could have been that one environment that you're reading the room and the kids are just not focused.
Mhm.
How to make that change, but then give that segue back into the education. Do you think we need to do something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll first start saying, when I taught high school for 7 years, and again, I taught culinary, fashion, like all the fun classes, like, but never, any given time, I would have maybe 6 sessions of culinary classes. That's about 120 different students, and not.
Mm.
Yes, I have my lesson plan for the day. I know what standards I want to teach. I know the goal and objectives for the day, but not every classroom is going to get through the same pace of what my lesson was for the day. And like you said, you got to read the room, and I think that really authentically goes at the very beginning of the school year. And I did this, and I actually teach a workshop about this on relationship building and different strategies on how to get to know your students in the classroom, really before you even start the core meat of the course, right? Because you have to understand, even from the environment of the room, as a class, does the majority of your class like the room's bright or dim, or do you like a little music in the background? Do you know your peers sitting next to you? Do we got to do icebreakers? Are you going to have that challenging behaviors? I used to,
Yeah.
I'm a younger person, and the girls, for some reason at the high school, used to try to pick with me a little bit. And I'm like, listen, I'll be petty with you if we want to go there. Like, that's the kind of person I was. So it's like, we kind of like established like the boundaries very quickly in the realm. But they also knew I would also do a very strong, you know, activity. I would, real quick, I would have them, say, hey, we all have something going on in our lives, and that may be hard for us. I want us to write like an anonymous little note as much as you're comfortable. You don't put your name on it, anything.
Mm.
Tell us something that, you're struggling through, or a hardship that you're facing, anything where you're comfortable. I always also led with the caveat that I am a mandatory reporter. So if something were to, be said, and I knew at some certain points students' handwriting, right? So I could kind of put the puzzles together in a sense and
Right.
kind of do that behind the scenes. But I would leave with that at the high schools, like, if there's something that's endangering, or, I would always talk about that. But anyway, so kind of going back, we would, I would randomly pull out of that pile and just read some things like, I slept in my car last night, or me and my mom got into a fight, or my dad passed away last week, like, all of these things. And I would share that with the class for a sense of, listen, everybody in this room is really facing something difficult.
Mm.
And this should be a space where we can have fun, right? Because I did have the fun classes, that we can have fun, but we more importantly can support each other. And that this is a place for us to grow together, but we need to be more kind to each other, those types of conversations. So I really liked leading with that, with at least being able to control my classroom environment, because you can't necessarily
Yeah.
control what happens in the school or outside of that student's life. So as an educator, my goal was to always make those connections with students, and also show them in a sense that I do care about them, but I also want them to care about each other. And it was really helpful. And kind of backtracking
Yeah.
to what we learn, right, when we're in our collegiate programs, as you were mentioning with behaviors, in my master's program, I really only had one class that specifically touched on, special needs and students with special needs, and behaviors associated with different types of special needs.
But it was special needs only.
Special needs, not your
Not,
general
no,
behavioral.
it intertwines some of the law and
Mhm.
intertwines
Yes.
how to read the
Yes.
IEPs and ISPs
That's
and the
what it was.
504s.
But you do not
Yeah.
get like, oh, if you have a troublesome child that's, in your general public classes, that's not, how do you handle those behaviors? And, you don't get just like in parenting, we don't get a book of how to
You don't get a
parent
book.
or protect. Like, yes, there's books out there, but that's not going to be generally applicable to everybody. And I could share some stories on my own children, and I'm like, okay, I know all these things, but I still don't understand the behavior. So there's a lot of things that I feel that positive opportunities that are missed within these collegiate programs. If you're in your master's, doctors, even your bachelor's, that yes, you get to how to do basic classroom management, but it isn't really more of like, I really like restorative practices. I'm never a teacher that would kick the kids out, because the high schools will test you just to get kicked out. And I would immediately tell them, listen, I don't kick people out of my class. You're staying here. I want you to learn something today. And I actually was this teacher that would go and pull these kids out of the lunchroom and drag them back into the classroom, because it was right on the outside of my door. But I would, very much so of, hey, I want you here. I want you in this space. I want you to cherish your education. It is something that is important. You may not like everything, but you really have to. So I really wish that there were more. I think there's common themes across the board in education that we see, in behavior. There's a lot of concerning things that lead to bigger issues in our education systems. But even just the very basic things that can be addressed should be shared, and just basic strategies. I don't think it's super difficult to have kind of like a playbook to play with, just like in any sports industry. They always have tips and tricks. Like, we have all kinds of them. I think it's just more of having that kind of resource and being able to share that with
I think you just
educators.
nailed on something. You know what came to mind? We used to have something called a prim manual.
Mm.
I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It was pretty interesting. So you could look up the behavior and look at some options that you could use within the classroom. I wish I could find it. It was called the Prim Manual. If I can, while we're talking, see if I can find it. I'm almost positive that's what it's called. And it was a pre-referral intervention manual. It's a book by Stephen B. McCartney. Believe it or not, I just found it. This is incredible. I just found it. And we had something called the pre-referral intervention manual, and it was called PRIM. And it provided a direct response to state mandated pre-referral intervention activities that could be used. Some of them were really not bad at all. I mean, it really made you think quite a bit. And we used that. We ended up using that through our MTSS program or a VTSS program, just because I hate to say it, sometimes you think of everything you could think of and then you run out. So we would pull that PRIM manual out, or the pre-intervention manual out, and try to figure out what could we use. And I had to use that as like a teaching tool to a lot of my novice teachers, or those who are first or third year teaching, because our goal is to keep them until 5 years. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen as often as we would like. I know we're getting close to the end. I really know that we are. And you and I have touched, I told you, you and I just go roll. We roll all the time. We roll all the time. Talking about wellness, I would love for you to just give one piece of advice that you would give, since you work with the charter schools or the nonprofit schools. What would be one piece of advice that you would give, or do you? I got too many questions. That's the issue. I'm thinking of like, what is the difference between a traditional pre-K-12 versus the public and charter and the nonprofit when we look at wellness? Why don't we do that?
Yeah, I think, well, when you're speaking more of a public, because there is a difference between a public charter and a private charter, right? So we can even say there, right? So you have your private charter, one that really doesn't have to necessarily follow all the rules that are put in place at the HR level, at the legal levels, when you're talking how do you operate and run your school, and the accountability sense. What I find more in the private charter is that the rules that are written for that school, the culture and climate that is formed for that school, has specifically been put together because a person has saw a need for a certain type of school to meet the needs of a certain group of people or a community of people, right? And so that you tend to recruit and hire people that more meet the ethical standards that you're looking for your climate and culture of your school, versus in a public, and not ever saying anything wrong about public entities, but public
No.
schools, they look for those that are under the qualifications. Do they make the qualifications of being able to teach X, Y, and Z standard, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that that teacher is going to meet what the climate and culture is of that district or that school, right? Because even between schools in a public, if you have 3 different high schools, just from my experience in teaching, I was in a community with 3 different high schools. Each climate and culture of those high schools were all very different. And so
Yes.
again, I think, and then going back to the private charter, is that there is an opportunity for families to align with those overall, and understand upfront during enrollment what that climate and culture will look like in their expectations and involvement as a parent in those schools. And in education, you kind of have like, oh, read this, sign this, in public education, and you agree to this, but that isn't what you're really needing. It's just a general outlook for that school or that district, and you kind of have to play along where you fit in a sense. Where private sometimes is a little bit more inclusive of the whole family. So yeah, I think there's so much difference there, especially, but and you tend to see, and that's, I think, in certain charter instances that really do a good job with their academics and really do put that front and running very ethical and positive programs, is that you will have positive outcomes from those students. And are we talking benchmarking and testing scores? Maybe not, but the students are loving and enjoying their education experience, and they may come out a little bit more ahead at the end of the day, because they have that opportunity to not have to worry about all of the politics or the other stuff that some of the public schools do focus on, and takes away from that relationship building within the school.
And so from what I'm gathering and also talking to other people, I'm just putting it out there just in general. What I've realized is that a lot of people who are in their micro school or in their private school or in their private charter schools, teachers tend to stay a little bit longer because they are helping create that culture
Yes.
where the public school setting, we have our rules, our policies, and our things that we must follow. And so sometimes the navigation part can play a role in how we function socially or how
Yeah.
we focus on our emotional awareness. Not saying anyone is better than the other, it is a
No.
preference of that person. Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
Well,
And
Kylie, it has been amazing. I can't believe we're almost at the end, but I just want to say thank you so much. Is there any one key thing you want to say to anybody?
oh, yes, I've been pushing this message, and really to the parents. If we have any parents that are listening, I'm a parent myself. Is really, regardless of what type of school that you're in with your children, even homeschooling, we have to be very much inclined in paying attention to our children and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, making those relationships with your children's teachers, being a part of that school community, showing up to parent-teacher conferences, going to your kids' plays and sports, events. Like, just be proactive and be involved. A little does go a long way with children. And again, if you're a parent that struggles with helping with your students' homework, you have to learn those skills yourself, and don't be embarrassed by that. And I really do believe it takes a village to raise children, and it's not going to be our responsibility or just the school's responsibility. And this goes for beyond academics. It's the social emotional, it's the academics, it's the climate and culture. Like, you have to be present to have your voice heard. So I would just say be more present if you can.
Thank you so much, Miss Kylie Elizabeth with the
Thank
Virtuoso
you.
Educator. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your time and for being on Cold Press Conversations.
Thank you.